Making really good hiring decisions is going to be one of the most important things that a sales manager will do over the course of their career. In effect, we are standing as the gatekeeper. We need to make sure that the people who are coming on board are going to be meeting or exceeding those same standards of behavior that we are going to expect the team to embody over the course of our time with it. Now, if we get this decision wrong, there can be quite interesting and severe consequences. For example, if we have someone who comes in and is disruptive, then it's just going to impact all the other members of the team in a really negative way. And the time and the money that's going to take to set things right is just something that we don't want to be investing in if we can avoid it. Damage in the marketplace can be another issue. If you have someone who is coming in a short period of time, makes a real negative impact on the company's reputation, again, this is something that's going to take a lot of time and effort to try to put right. And in the same way as having a terrible deal is much worse than having no deal at all, I would argue that it's much better to have a vacancy on your team than to fill it with, an average to mediocre person. It just isn't going to work out in the long run if we drop our standards for the sake of expediency. Now, a vacancy in many scenarios can be covered to some extent by other members of the team chipping in terms of geography or product or what have you. So it's not always a complete loss if we don't have a person who's working on the team with us. But it's certainly a much better scenario than having a person that's going to come on board and just not perform, do damage, and cause us real heartache in the long run. So this video is going to cover some tips that are specific to working with hiring salespeople onto a sales team, and we'll go into that now. Thanks for listening. And first off, just a quick mention, if you aren't aware, within this channel, there's a playlist that's covering interviewing. The interview series has something in the order of about 10 videos up at the moment. So there are quite a few questions and suggested answers that are worth having a look at. This entire section of the platform is designed to be worthwhile for both an interviewer as well as an interviewee. So if you haven't done so already, I'd recommend having a look at some of those. And next, I'll cover things that are going to be specific to a salesperson. First step before going into the interview, I would suggest having a prepared list of questions written out in front of you, ready to go. Why? Because if we're going to be asking candidates questions over different time periods over the course of a day or weeks, if we've got the same list of questions that are delivered in the same way and in the same order, then in effect they're all taking the same test, the same examination, and it's so much easier to compare and pit one person's performance against another. Now, of course, there will be follow-on questions or tag-ons and so on. That's all well and good. But if we've got that core set of questions that we're using, it just gives everyone a clean, fair plate to work from. And I would also argue that it's not necessary to go through every question. If you get down to about question 2 or 3 and you realize that this candidate just is not going to work out because they have clearly not met the standard, you don't need to prolong the agony. There's no necessity to move on through all the rest of them just to come to that conclusion. If they've really shown that they're not up to the job, then it's best just to let them know there and then that, hey, I've got all the information I need from you right now. Thanks very much for your time. And if you need to, just close it quickly and then move on and spend the time doing something else that's going to be productive. I found it really useful to include a bit of a practical element within the interview. So a person can sometimes start off with, quite a good scorecard going up already. They're quite personable, they're enthusiastic, they tick quite a few of the boxes, and you believe that, hey, you seem to have someone who might be, a contender here on your hands. And then when you start to offer up some practical scenarios to see how the person would act, respond, and behave, it all falls apart. And this is something that I find is best to learn in the interview than when you actually get into the scenario when they're working for you. So we'll go through a few examples of how we can layer in some practical elements to the interview, just as a way of spreading the field to see who really is someone worth considering. The first area is going to be scenario-based questions. So, in particular, one of the key elements that goes hand in hand with sales ability is someone who's also going to be looking after our customers. And if you put out a few scenarios along the lines of, right, you've just had a call from an angry customer who's really upset because, the delivery on this product was delayed by about a month or so, and they were made promises that were broken, and now they're on the phone to you, what steps would you take? This type of thing that they should be normally dealing with on a day-to-day basis anyway, just gives you an idea of what their thinking is, how they can handle practical scenarios, what their priorities would be, how they would go about solving problems. And all of that is going to filter into our consideration of evaluating that person against all the others that we're going to pose the same question to and see how they rate. I would then suggest asking the candidate to sell you, in effect, as if you were the customer or the end consumer, what have you, their product or service. Now, this should be an easy one for them because it's what they're doing for a living already. It should come out very smoothly. They don't have to do any extra prep, or they're not put off guard. You're asking for something that should be really, an A+ performance. If they're good at their job, they're going to come back with an answer about this one that is going to be extremely convincing for you. And by all means, throw in a few questions or objections to make it a little bit more realistic to see how they would handle these things. And if someone's not able to have a, really quite stellar performance doing their own job at the moment, which purportedly they are trained and earning a living at doing, then how well do you imagine that they're going to be performing working for us? Not going to work out, is it? To stretch them a bit further, I would ask the candidate to sell me as the interviewer my own company's product or service. Now, this is putting them on a spot, because if they've done their research, then they should be able to have the bare bones to put together a bit of a presentation. At least they understand the ethos of your company, what industry you're in, your business, and they should make a decent attempt at trying to convince you or explain to you what your own business is. Now, if they've not done their research and they've walked into an interview scenario somewhat unprepared, they simply will not have an answer for this. And it's a very telling thing because, let's face it, we do not want people working for us that are going to go into a sales scenario, bearing in mind that this interview is going to replicate a sales scenario, right? And that sales appointment may well have taken weeks or months to get with a key customer. It's really significant. And if you're prepared to go into something like that without having done your preparation, then chances are you're not going to be successful in the long run, and this is the kind of candidate that we can weed out from the process. So in summary, making sure that we make the right decision when it comes to hiring is one of the most critical things that we'll ever do as a sales manager. And we should expect candidates to come to that interview. This is about their life, their future, their career. They should come into it prepared to excel and to impress us, to wow us. Now, if you haven't checked out the other episodes that are involved in the interview series, please go ahead and have a look at them there. They're intended for both the interviewer as well as the interviewee. And from a practical standpoint, I would absolutely advise using some scenario-based questions just to put them on the spot a little bit and see how they would perform. It's as close as we're going to get to see how they would perform in an actual sales scenario in the interview process, and thereby be able to make a quite good critical judgment as to whether this candidate is meeting or not meeting our standards, and if they do, how they rank against the other candidates that are in the same situation.